Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Susanna Hermans of Oblong Books in the Hudson Valley of New York State. Welcome to Oblong Online, one of our fantastic virtual author events that we're still so pleased to be able to present. Tonight, we are so excited to host Lyanda Lynn Haupt in conversation with Susan Fox Rogers. Lyanda is a naturalist, eco-philosopher, and author of Mozart's Starling, The Urban Bestiary, Crow Planet, Pilgrim on the Great Bird Continent, and Rare Encounters with Ordinary Birds. Her new book is Rooted, which shows us that cutting-edge science supports a truth that poets, artists, mystics, and earth-based creatures across the world have proclaimed over millennia. Life on this planet is radically interconnected. Lyanda lives in Seattle with her husband and daughter. We're so pleased to have her here with us tonight. And she's in conversation with our dear friend, Susan Fox Rogers, who's a visiting associate professor of writing at Bard College. She's the author of My Reach and the editor of 10 previous anthologies, including Antarctica, and most recently, When Birds Are Near. We will have the author speak for some period of time and then open things up to questions. So please drop those in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen, or you can use the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of your screen. We also strongly encourage you to pick up a copy of Rooted from us at Oblong. There is a buy the book button under the speakers' beautiful faces. And Lyanda will be signing book plates for us, so you'll be able to get a signed copy of Rooted. And I will also drop links to buy Susan's books into the chat in just a moment. Thank you so much and enjoy the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm incredibly excited for this conversation. I'm a big fan of, I think it was Crow Planet was how I first was introduced to your work. And this book it's such a great book for these times. It's so clear and graceful in how you move through religious mystics and scientific information and literary naturalists. And I was sort of wondering, for people who have not had the chance to read the book, and everybody should be hitting the buy the book button at the bottom of the page there. I'm wondering how you describe it, because as I was talking to people about doing this event, I would say sometimes it's a book about how we should live. You have that great moment where you summon Thoreau, where you say, Thoreau went into the wilderness not to ask, what can nature do for me, but how should I live? I have to say that passage there took my breath away. But it's also a book about how you should walk or how you should speak. And it's sort of all of these things. And then your publisher has this great line saying that it's a beautifully written manifesto. So I'm wondering, how do you describe this? Because there's so much going on here, which is just part of the pleasure of the book. Yeah.
Thank you. And I agree, there is a lot going on. And, they say that you can't judge a book by its cover, but in this case, I really hope people do judge it by its cover. What I love about this crosscut is that it's multi-layered. Are the rings individual? Yes. Are they all making a whole? Yes, they're doing both. Is everything an individual being that's on here? Yes, but are they part of a wild tangle? Yes. So I'm just going to do a shout out to illustrator Helen Nicholson, who lives in the UK, and she lives in Brighton. So any other Jane Austen fans can be jealous of her along with me. But I'll show a couple more of her beautiful interior art as we go along. But right, so as Susan, as you were saying, we live in this complicated time, and I began writing this book before the pandemic. I didn't even know. We didn't know a pandemic was going to happen. And still, as I began discussing the idea of this book with my editor, I said, here we are at this unprecedented ecological moment and political moment of crisis all around before the last period of time. And so I was seeking, as we are seeking with even more depth and awareness now, how to address our need for purpose while at the same time feeling very much adrift, and paralyzed by all of the things that need to happen and all of the options we have for action. Mm-hmm. And so what I describe, how I describe this book is a set of guideposts or waymarkers for finding our way in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because a hard part of that question, how to live, the question we're all asking, what do I do? How do I live? Is that there's no one answer.
Right.
There's no pat answer. The
Right.
answer is as infinite as we are individual.
Mm.
And so what I wanted to do was invite us into conversations that can help us find our own way in response to that question. So as you say, how to walk, how do we speak about nature and other beings? How do we use our creativity in service of the world and one another? How do we relate to other animals and other than human beings? How do we apprentice ourselves to that great, cycle of life and death and life and death, that spiral? So those are some of the chapters that are featured.
Well, I think what was so, I mean, we'll get into that, to the sort of the more specifics of those, what's on those guideposts along the way, because what I really enjoyed was how concrete some of them were. There's actual things that you can do. But I would love it if you read, when you talk about sort of being in a moment of crisis and being paralyzed. I know that I have 2 former students in the audience here, which I'm delighted that one of them who actually works for your publishing house, Zoe. And so on page 21, would you be willing to read 21 and 22 to us? Because I just love this section, and sort of I think it spoke very much to me, but I think also to younger people who the overwhelm, I think, is even more profound at this point. So would you be willing to read those pages?
I will. And I want to thank you for the invitation to read out loud. I think reading aloud is an art. It's one that I'm not particularly good at. I'm just average. But I think being read to is an art that we're losing, and so
yeah.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to share reading and being read to, that reciprocity. So
I really wanted to hear your voice reading this, because I have this, anyway, go ahead, that's great.
All right, this is from the introduction. I call it an invocation, and it's called Frog Church. And I want to share Helen's beautiful invitation through art into this chapter. In this time of planetary crisis, overwhelm is common. What to do? There is so much, too much. No single human can work to save the orcas and protect the Amazon and organize anti-fracking protests and write poetry that inspires others to act and pray in a hermit's dwelling for transformation and get dinner on the table. How easy it is to feel paralyzed by obligations. How easy it is to feel lost and insignificant and unable to know what is best, to feel adrift while yearning for purpose. Rootedness is a way of being in concert with the wilderness and wildness that sustains humans and all of life. The rooted pathways offered here are not meant as a definitive list, but as waymarkers and fortification for all of us seeking our unique, bewildering, awkward way through the essential question of how to live on our broken, imperiled, beloved earth. It is the question Thoreau asked, the one that Mary Oliver, who passed just before I wrote these words, has perhaps framed most beautifully. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I love that word. I love the tell me. That just really brings us into that question. Tell me. We all come to know our own lessons as they spring from the study of our households, our woodlands, our watching, our footprints, the trails of our kindred wild ones that cross our paths, our intelligent feet, our making hands, our listening ears. The word rooted's own root is the Latin radix, the center from which all things germinate and arise. The radix is the radical, the intrinsic, organic, fervent heart of being and action. Rooted lives are radically intertwined with the vitality of the planet. In a time that evokes fear and paralysis, rooted ways of being within nature assure us that we are grounded in the natural world. Our bodies, our thoughts, our minds, our spirits are affected by the whole of the earthen community and affect this whole in return. This is both a mystical sensibility and a scientific fact. It is an awareness that makes us tingle with responsibility with its beauty, its poetry. It makes our lives the most foundational form of activism. It means everything we do matters, and matters wondrously. Amphibious, we wander at the singular, radical intersection of science, nature, and spirit. Here resides a multifaceted understanding of the interdependence of earthly life and the engaged activism that such an understanding inspires and requires. Here are the interwoven pathways of inward, wild stillness and outward, feral action. At this crossroads, there is intelligence and sacredness and wildness, grace. There is clear-sighted hope in a time of despair. Rooted ways embolden us to remember that with our complex minds, we can feel and live more than one thing simultaneously. Anxiety, difficult, fear, despair. Yes. Beauty, connectedness, possibility, love. Yes.
Just love that section. And this line, it makes our lives our most foundational form of activism. I mean, it's just the call to live your life here is, it's just so marvelous to me. So thank you for that. And I think that, you lay out at the beginning of this book sort of what is rooted, and sort of we get a sense of that from the passage that you read, but your subtitle is also loaded and complex. And I love the combination of spirit and nature and science, which often we have nature and science, or we have nature and spirit, but the three of them together rarely come together. And the spirit side of this I found just marvelous. The beginning where you talk about sort of being in fourth grade and your mother giving you Saint Therese of Lisieux and the story of a soul. And I think you're the only person who I've ever read who writes, that you love being raised Catholic, but you don't remain in a Christian in any way, sort of a Christian thought. You range through a lot of religious beliefs and a lot of religious practices. And the passage that I enjoyed the most, I would love to hear you talk about sort of that blending and bringing together that you do so well. But I would love to have you describe to people, and I may be mispronouncing it, adsum, and then there's another passage that I'd like you to read in relation to that. But if you could talk a little bit about sort of the spirit side of this, and you're sort of branching out into a range of spiritual thinking or thinkers, all of it. Yeah.
Right. So I use spirit very expansively, and thanks for recognizing that. I've had some people say, I'm not going to, I don't want to read this book. It's about, I'm not religious. So this is not a book about religion. It's about religion. So if you're not religious, it's okay. It doesn't matter. I think this book is for you. And when I think of spirit, I think of those dimensions of our human intelligence that are not able to be quantified by scientific, our imagination, our creativity, things that make us, I think all of us would agree, whole and deep humans, and yet are outside of scientific measure, rightly and beautifully. It doesn't mean that science does not inspire wonder, or that scientists are not sometimes some of the most poetic or wonder-filled people that I have met. But it's just the way that these things enmesh, or the way that we apprehend certain dimensions of knowledge is different, depending on what aspect of our intelligence is activated. So that kind of confusingly, but so that's what I mean, kind of expansively by spirit. I was Catholic, and I didn't know anything that was going to happen in the Catholic Church, and I just enjoyed being raised in this sort of playground of saints who were doing wild things, talking to
right,
and communing with birds and living in caves and calling it all sacred, and that inspired my sense of sanctuary in nature from a young age. So I have this friend, in response to Susan, thanks for asking about this word, assume. It's a Latin word, and usually the monastic vows of profession in most Western monastic orders is a secret, but I have a friend who's a monk, and after a little wine one night, he told me about his own monastic profession and this question that he was invited to respond to, which was, are you going to commit your life to this uncertainty, this wilderness of uncertainty that you wander into in a monastic life? And it's really, in a way, it's the question that we all live, right? Sure. Nothing is guaranteed. How are we going to walk a path? And he said that the answer is ancient, from the 16th century. Latin is ad sum. And the answer is it means I am here. I am here. And it doesn't even mean that you know what you're doing. That's what I really like about that, is it's so open-ended. I'm paralyzed by not knowing what we're doing, but we can offer our ad sum, all right, I'm here. I'm going forward. And so that's what that's about.
I love that. I love that. There's a passage that follows where you describe ad sum, that this idea of I am here. It's so solidifying. And this is the section Pilgrim on the Wolf Path. Mm-hmm. It's on page 38.
Okay. Should I read? I could read to the top of 39, or do you want me to read all of 39? I need to read the first paragraph.
I think you might have to read all of 39. Yeah.
Taskmaster. All right. This is a section called Pilgrim on the Wolf Path, and I'm going to show you a picture again. It'll be like story time at the library. It's so beautiful. The wild wandering path. All right. Who among us has not heard it? The wolf of this beloved, damaged earth, beckoning us by name just outside our safe living room, demanding our own response. The strange and persistent furry pod knocking. We peek tentatively through the door, just ajar, and see that there is no road, no sidewalk, barely a trail, and that obscured by stones, by leaves, by an intimation of the remains of those who have walked before us upon the unyielding circle of life. In spite of it all, we long to walk this path, for we know that there is more than what has been given and named by the overculture, more than what we have been told is true, more than green gardens and nature calendars and recycling and a summer hike in the mountains and an occasional camping trip, more even than an hour-long forest bath, however lovely that sounds. We know there is a wild earth, and upon it, within it, a wilder, more authentic human self. We know the need of each for the other is absolute. And soon, we pack our satchel lightly and cross the threshold. We enter into a geography of mind and soil, unsteady as we track a wilder foothold. We enter as pilgrims, as wayfarers, knowing there is something we are seeking, something nameless, beautiful, waiting, wanting. Something that will change us so thoroughly that our cozy slippers will no longer fit, that our cat will at first hiss upon our return, our hair tinted green with lichen, sweet root tendrils among our toes. We enter knowing the path is invisible, the terrain uneasy, the weather uncertain, our minds unprepared. We enter knowing that we are not able to save the earth in one fell swoop, or in any swoop at all, that our work here will fall short, even as there is no alternative but to act. We enter absolutely entangled with every creature, tree, stone, and human above and below the soil. And with this as our lodestar and comfort, we understand that we enter too, completely alone, with little but our wild instincts to guide us. Some ecological activists want to reserve the word wildness for the material, non-human big wild, the forested wilderness, the desert, the ocean, and all the planet's creatures whom they work so hard in their lives to protect. There is beauty in this impulse, but I believe that it is also important to claim wildness as a state of mind and a way of being, both dimensions of the word, the wild as sacred lands and the wild as quality of consciousness, must inform the other. Wild hearts breed love and protection of a wild earth.
such a great section. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there's there's this wonderful sort of movement that happens, even you see it in each of these sections, and yet you have this almost extraordinary infrastructure going on here. I'm thinking more as a writer, for our young writers in the audience, perhaps, how you have your chapters, and within the chapters these subsections. I mean, there's this sort of wonderful organization of your ideas, and it reminds me a little of when I would read Ed Abbey, and you read him and you just think, this man is crazy, and it feels like he's on a total rant. And then you look closely at his paragraphs and you realize they're incredibly organized. It's like, this is my paragraph on how angry I am this morning, and then this is my paragraph about the snake. So in a sense, this organization that you have here allows you this movement. I see it this way. Do you see this as how do you even go about this as a writer? So
it was so hard, Susan. I'll be honest.
I just can't imagine.
So long, because it's not how it started, of course. It's a
sure.
Your best laid plans. So I was actually going to write it as a spiral. I thought, sort of. Because I talk about inward thought and outward action, right? So I thought I would sort of pair those things. We'll do this inward section and then an outward action, inward section, outward action. But it turned out that those things, I just couldn't separate them. It just didn't work. Yeah. They're not separate. Just like science and nature and spirit, I sort of pictured, I had this great map. It was all drawn. It was a triquetra, like a Venn diagram with 3 circles overlapping in the middle. And I was going to say, oh, these don't all always overlap, and they shouldn't always overlap, but here's this place they come together. And that's what I'm writing about. And that fell apart too, because it turned out not to be true. I really couldn't pull them apart. It was like the circles were all on top of each other and then smushed together on top of that. So it took me a long time. I pulled out a big paper. I moved it off my desk today, but I keep this giant roll of paper on my desk, that like kids paper, art paper, and a big box of papers and crayons on my desk too. So when I can't figure out what to do, I write everything down. So I was reading, there's this beautiful new edition of the newest edition of Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea books that came out. Unfortunately, it came out after she died. It was illustrated by wonderful fantasy illustrator, Charles Vess. And she worked with him on the illustrations, and she worked on the map of Earthsea with him as well. But for that map, come around to structure here, he worked from a map that she drew. And one great thing about this new edition of her work is that she talks about the writing of all of them and adds material. So one of the things she said is that the first thing that she did before even setting the paper and Earthsea was to make the map of Earthsea. And if you've ever seen it, it's full of, my computer's on top of it right now, otherwise I'd show it to you. But it's this map of all these inlets and little islands that never are part of the book, ever. But she said if she didn't have this world to draw from, how would she know what she was writing about? And so that's kind of what this book is like. I wrote everything down that I wanted to say in my manifesto, in my kind of what I really want to say about this moment, and what I have learned in decades of thinking about how to live on Earth. Not that I know the answers, but just share so far. So I wrote it all down and drew all these lines around things that went together, and finally ended up creating these little islands that reminded me of Ursula's map that became the chapters. And then the subsection writing in subsections turned out to be just so suitable to the layer content, as you say. Then I can be within the chapter, and then I can have like a peony, sort of have little petals with it.
It just sort of opens up, and that sort of movement together happens. And I would stop and I was like, whoa, how did she do that? And then I realized it's partly because you've put things into, they're on the map, it's like, okay, now we're here, so it's just sort of geniusly done. So I was dazzled at certain moments of how you pulled that off. And there's something that you just said as you were speaking now, that you don't have the answers, but you wanted to share. And I think that one of the things that I find difficult in reading a lot of the works that are coming out in relation to our climate crisis or our challenges with the natural world that there is often the sense that the writer has the answers, and it's just like, but you don't, admit that you don't, and that sense of that you're sharing with us, sort of, this is what I found, and this works for me, and so I think in that sense, like at the end of, no, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but at the end of the chapters, those sort of commands, as they were, or sort of, let's do this. So somebody like walk a new way or decommodify the forest. I felt like I could almost like put them up around my office, sometimes go alone, lift up our animal kindred. And I think, one of the ones that I love most, it comes early in the book, was the go barefoot, partly because it's like, well, that I can do that, it's sort of this very hands-on, it's like I've been walking around barefoot ever since I read this, it felt very kind of like this wonderful immediate grounding, and it's you're sharing with us, it's like, this is what you do. And so that it's sort of like, you might want to try it too, go barefoot. So it rather than saying, this is going to be the answer to your questions, it's sort of this wonderful sharing that I really appreciate. So I'm wondering, amongst the I don't want to call them commands, I don't know what you call them at the end of the chapter, sort of cheer.
Sorry, we've got a little bit of, I'll just jump in with one reviewer called them imperatives, and I thought that's kind of a cool word. I think of them as invitations. Sort of
invitations. That's a great, the invitations here. Try this. So of the invitations here, which ones do you feel are sort of the most daring? Like that when you came to them, which I do feel that through the sections you write your way toward these invitations, and then sort of like, okay, this is what I'm going to invite the reader to, right? And so which one you finally came to, it felt sort of more daring, and maybe which ones do you find most difficult to accept your own invitation, as it were?
Oh, that's a great question. As far as the one that's most daring, I will say decommodify the forest is at the end of a chapter on forest bathing. It's called Immerse, How to Stay Dirty During a Forest Bath. And that's one of the pivotal chapters for me. And the reason it was daring is because it is a sort of it's an off the beaten path view in ecological circles of the science of forest bathing. And so without going too far into it, I'll just say that I love the science behind forest bathing. It affirms a connection and at-homeness with the natural world. It affirms the fact that our health, both mental and physical, relies on being at times in nature, that 99.99% of human evolution outside of a built environment. So our bodies, when we're not in nature at all, are just freaking out all the time, which is, why we're in, such a mess all the time. The response of having guided forest baths and seeing for the forest as a therapist, I think walks the line between reciprocity and commodification that we have to be really careful about. And so I love that forest bathing is getting people out into nature and inviting us to use our senses to interact with the natural world. But I wanted to invite us at the same time to recognize that it's going back to that question, that if we go into nature with the idea, oh, I'm walking in nature because it makes me feel better, or it makes and I do that, I feel a mess, I think I'm going to go out, go for a walk and feel better. But if our guiding question is, what can it do for me?
What can it do for me? Yeah.
Instead of how do I live, then we're not walking that side of reciprocity and commodification in a way that's helpful, I think. And so I just want to ask people to think about that. I'm not meaning to demean that science or people that do that work. It's beautiful.
Right.
Asking you to think about it. So that was daring for me, because I was I was worried what people who are my friends who do this kind of work, and these people that I love, I just was worried about it not being taken the right way. And that hasn't happened. So I'm really grateful for that. It's just, we're all on the same side on that. But that was the most daring one. And the hardest one for me to think about was the last one. The last chapter, it's called Return. right? It's called Return. I don't even know what it's called. It's called Spiral, A Wild Return. And it looks at the question. I'm going to show that picture because I love it so much, the illustration. It talks about the way that we think about death in the world and in relationship to ourselves. And one of the things that I did while writing this chapter was sew the dress that I will be buried in. And I talked to natural funeral grounds to ask what their specifications were. And they said, just all natural. You can't even have a little shred of synthetic thread. And I've been embroidering quotations on the dress from people like Joy Harjo and Remember You Are the Skin of the Earth. And I hope I might have said a syllable wrong there. And Emily Dickinson. And so just trying to engage that way. And it's been really hard. I wrote that chapter and I thought, wow, I sound really glib. You know, there's a coyote skull on my shelf and parts of animals around. If you're a naturalist, this happens in your house. And here I am sewing a shroud, and it just makes me sound all peaceful and wise about it. And I am so not. It's all just trying to come to terms and trying to seek some sort of calm about that I do not have. I'm not there. And they say that as we age, maybe we gain that perspective more and more, but so far I'm not finding it. So this chapter is, again, it's an invitation into the themes that are significant.
Yeah. Do you want to read something from the final chapter? I didn't select something there, but maybe there's something in there that would.
If you like, I'll do it. I'll do whatever I want, Susan.
Okay.
As far as carefully selected passages, I appreciate that so much. So whatever you think is best.
Well, what are we doing on time? I have two more questions here, and then I would love for the audience to chime in and ask the questions that they might have. One of the things that I really admired about the book is sort of your inversion of our way of seeing certain things, the passages of you going out and walking at night and not taking any kind of light, and sort of, that all the ways that we think of darkness as being bad and evil and all of it, and you invert that into it. I mean, it just made me want to go out and walk in the dark. That it's, solitude in a world that, has us connected constantly. There's all these sort of inversions here. I kept thinking that, our great-great-grandfather, Michel de Montaigne, would have been very proud of you with your, how you doing that. And I think that one of the sections where you sort of, I'm not sure it's exactly an inversion, but you definitely take the idea of wandering and make it something new, in the sense that, as somebody who wanders a lot and often feels like she's might be wasting her time, that it sort of made me treasure my wandering even more. And so there's two passages. It's the opening of the section on wandering that I really enjoyed so much that I would love to hear you read as well.
Okay. I love this little.
Yeah, this is a good one.
So she shows up in the story eventually. Susan, thank you so much for carefully choosing passages that tie in with your.
It was a real pleasure.
Wander is a beautiful word, a word that startles our imaginations into wanting and longing too. For in a world of schedules and deadlines and Google Maps asserting a linear, time-bound path through our lives, the idea of wandering seems a sweet dream, ever out of reach. Wanderlust, ever unrequited. Who has the means? Money is not required, nor equipment of any kind. The necessary means here are more rare, a spaciousness of mind, an expansiveness of time, an unhurried pace. I'm sorry, I am distracted by, I'm just gonna pause. I have I'm in front of my office, my study window. I'm at my desk is up against the window, and there's this stick-on hummingbird feeder there. And the hummingbird feeder is just right above the top of my computer. And there's this male and his hummingbird coming to the feeder. So it looks like he's just coming right into your hair. And it's
Nothing could make me happier, honestly.
Okay, he's gone, so I should be able to keep my. That was a wandering moment of
great wandering. Yeah. Hi, little hummingbird.
So the necessary means here are more rare, like hummingbird visitations, a spaciousness of mind and expansiveness of time, an unhurried pace. It's a circular problem, to be sure. While these things are essential for good wandering, it is wandering itself that engenders them. Sort of the conundrum of morning. How are we supposed to make coffee when we haven't had coffee? Walking is the naturalist pace, the tempo at which observation can occur, the sniffing, watching, inhaling, uphill, downhill, spiral pace of footed mammals. Alongside certain ways of running and dancing to rhythm, it is among the ancestral wild movements for humans. Walking, we are self-reliant, knowing inhabitants of our own bodies and in cahoots with other animal bodies. But where walking is a way of moving oneself through the world, wandering is more of a mindset. In Wanderlust, Rebecca Solnit writes of her suspicion that the mind, like the feet, works at about 3 miles an hour. If this is so, then modern life is moving faster than the speed of thought or thoughtfulness. Wandering brings mind and movement into a healing congruity.
Great. And would you read a little bit more in this section on the song lines, self lines that's on page 72 to 73?
Sure. All right. Song lines, self lines. Wandering may be directionless, but it need not be dopey. And by the way, Susan, I lost your face on the screen. I can hear you, I think. Yeah, but.
Huh. I can still see you.
Okay, someone else can see her. Okay, I can see you. I wonder what's right. Okay, just FYI, I can hear you fine. All right. Wandering may be directionless, but it need not be dopey. There is no reason to move about like meditative clouds. We can leap, dance, run like a coyote, wave our arms like an unruly child, like an octopus, like a tree. We can hum, sing, scream, or dwell in shadowy silence. We can pad forward, double back. We can be home for dinner. We can forget we have a home. Our paths go their own way, a new way, a strong way. Wandering can be a disquieting activity given the cultural expectation to at least appear productive. But in her 1938 classic, If You Want to Write, Brenda Wayland declares aimless attention essential to good work and deep thought. She writes, oh, you're back, Susan. Okay. So, Brenda Wayland. So you see, the imagination needs moodling, long, inefficient, happy idling, dawdling, and muttering. These people who are always briskly doing something and as busy as waltzing mice, they have little sharp staccato ideas, but they have no big ideas. Directionlessness leads to clear vision and creative flourishing. Decoupled from overt value in the usual measures, wandering is an unorthodox act, removing us from the anthropic realm of striving, judgment, and economic utility. It allows us to uncover our authentic direction, a squiggling awkward thing at first, a back and forth curving that begins tentatively and grows more assured, more knowing, more graced. Emily Dickinson was a spiritual seeker and a religious rebel, a pagan and an infidel, self-proclaimed. Of her many names for God, my favorite is vagabond. Do you want me to finish that paragraph?
No, that's great. And we actually have some questions coming in, so this is wonderful. I just love this idea that it's like, but it need not be dopey. And it was terribly affirming for me. Whenever I feel like I've been wandering around too much, I'll come back and read this.
Well, as soon as you say be meditative, people are like, oh, then we have to, and people will think we're weird. And actually, one of the tenets of my book is do not worry if people think you're weird. That's actually one of our things. We're creating a new story. We're walking a new way. So it's okay that we look weird. We're not going to look like everyone else. And how fun is that? But
I think that that's sort of, the weirdness also that's you get away with it, right? That the weirdness doesn't become sort of like, oh, I don't want to be part of the weirdness. I think because of the structure that you have in this book, right? It's sort of we're with you, it's sort of we're just sort of rolling along with it. It's just that coupling of sort of the playfulness and the fun or the weirdness of it coupled with the organization is just it's like Abby's anger has a place there. It's so great. So I have we have a question coming in, so people start asking your questions or I'll just keep talking here. I'm going to say one last thing, that this is about the solitude section, that the first book that I edited was in the mid-90s, and it was titled Another Wilderness. It came out with a feminist press in Seattle, Seal Press, that was there at the time. And I started rock climbing when I was 15. So when I edited this book, I had this idea of I wanted I had this sense of myself going off, to Colorado to climb in Yosemite Valley. And I wanted sort of super women stories. And the stories started to come in. And the overwhelming thing that connected the stories were women being afraid. They were afraid of bears. They were afraid of snakes. They were afraid of doing what it is that they were going to do. And they were afraid of men. And it was just an overwhelming moment for me, because I realized I too was afraid, but I'd spent all this time sort of pretending that I wasn't, and everything was good. And I think one of the things I really admire about this is you have a passage in there about you're going off on your own, and there's you do not play the superwoman story, sort of you talk about that fear, and you give us this marvelous passage of everything that you're thinking of as you're sort of out there by yourself. And maybe you could read us some of those, haunting nighttime thoughts to give people a sense of it. But there's all these moments in the book where you are terribly honest when you're writing about, even your process of writing and the anxiety of that, it's always this sort of, you don't have all the answers, and you're not, you don't have it all figured out. So there's this, the sort of intimacy that develops with the reader as you go along, which I thought was really great. But if you could just read us that passage, and then we'll turn to questions from our audience here, I think that would be really great. Not that that's a great way to end, but I definitely want to.
And I love it. You're right. I mean, people think of nature writers as just under, the tree with our pencil and the dappled sun. And sometimes it's like that. Sometimes it's really, really not like that.
Yeah.
This chapter is called Safe in the Woods. The question people most often ask about my experiences in solitude is not what did you see or what did you learn, but weren't you afraid? And while I'm more eager to answer the first two questions, the truth is I am often afraid. And Susan, I've had that same experience talking with other women, that it was just such it was such an affirmation to realize that many, many women have that same experience, more women. And it's just very important to recognize and share.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
When I sleep in the woods alone, I am almost always scared out of my wits. Years ago, I did a solo alpine backpack on Mount Rainier, guardian of the Cascadia region called Tacoma by Coast Salish peoples. The climb was long and hot, and I was exhausted by the time I reached the small shimmering lake that was my destination. Dusk fell with grace upon my mind and body as I sipped my soup and watched the shadows overtake the water. I knew I would sleep as sound as a black bear cub, which did not happen. As soon as I stepped into my dark little tent, the night sounds, real and imagined, began. Shifting leaves, sighing trees, a snapping twig, my screaming heartbeats, footsteps falling. What? I'm switching to italics here. A mouse, a bobcat, a man. Oh God, it is a man. How did a man get here? Did he watch me eating soup? No, there is no man. But I heard a growl. Wait, did I? I did. Something big, a cougar. I am going to be eaten by a cougar, and he will drag me away, and there will be nothing but my diary and some blood left at the campsite, and my bereft family will search for my body forever and just find. I lay awake, thinking of ever more grisly details of my demise, berating myself while plotting my escape. Why did I come here? Why did I do this? My mother was right. I am I'll leave first thing in the morning, eat breakfast further down the trail just to get away from this creepy place. I can start packing now. The small things in my reach, I'd actually do that. First, like, I'll get out. And next time I think of hiking by myself, I will remember this and not do it. I am never doing this again. I must have fallen asleep at some point. In the morning, I woke up listening for twigs and winds and growls. There was only quiet. I unzipped the tent flap and peeked beyond it. Mist rose from the lake. I crawled out, stretched. The alpine firs were already fragrant in the morning light. On the water, a pair of hooded mergansers were gliding with 5 downy merganserlets, and across the tiny lake, a small herd of elk. All to myself. Velvety, white rum, regal soft. Their footsteps chimed through the mist, so near. What was wrong with me last night? Damn, I was nutso. How did I let my imagination run away like that? Look how beautiful and safe this is. Oh, what a gift to be here alone. I am so glad I didn't run off in the morning dark. Such peace I would be missing. That would have been so stupid. And when night fell, it started all over again.
You capture it too perfectly. I've had every single one of these thoughts. Oh my goodness, except I would never tell my mother that I was doing it, so she wouldn't get to weigh in on it.
I like the ways in now. I asked her, I said, now she says if I go hiking or camping alone, she says, Lyanda, just don't do that, or don't tell. I don't want to think about it. I said, Mom, why did you let me when I was younger? Because I have a daughter in college now. And she said, well, you wouldn't listen to me then.
Right.
I think it's so cute that now with my own daughter in college, I'm going to listen to her better. Which I actually do listen to her. I did that. But so my daughter has started hiking. She hasn't gone on a solo backpack, but she went on some hikes alone this summer. And it's really interesting. She came back from her first hike out in the Cascades. And she said, Mom, I realize now why you didn't want me to hike alone. And of course, my heart goes right to what did someone scare you? I said, what happened? Did someone scare you? And she said, no, it's just that it was the most wonderful thing I've ever done. And you knew that I do it all the time. So,
I'm never going to stop doing it now, right? Yeah.
Practicing what I preach.
It's so great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some questions here. So this is from Becky saying, I have been wanting to try doing a small camping trip alone, and this makes me want to even more. And at the same time confirms why I've been too nervous to try yet. Ha ha. So thank you for this. I've been starting out with small hikes around here in the Hudson Valley the last few months, and it feels incredible to slowly build up the confidence and release more fear each time. I think the one thing I would suggest for the first time that you go someplace by yourself is to go someplace that you're familiar with, to have, it's always sort of the stacking up of how many things cause you fear. Like, will I find the trail? Will there be a campsite? Will I find water? And if you can eliminate some of those, and then you can sort of contain, I find anyway, but do you have suggestions for this person who's thinking of going out on her first solo trip?
Well, I love the wisdom of building up to it, going out on day hikes first and going a little further and building up your confidence. That's all right and great. You're listening to your own wisdom. It sounds like I don't think I have anything to add to that.
And then you just do it and tell somebody that you're going.
Right. Tell somebody where you're going. And that's sort of one of the hard things, because when I went or even still go hiking, I don't always stick to my original destination. So I don't know how to counsel that, because I think one of the reasons I changed paths at one point was I walked. I don't want to sound too out there. I'm trying to say that this book is really grounded and sensible, even in matters of spirit. But I had this experience where I was walking down a path and I felt this terrible darkness fell over me. And I just thought, I'm just not going down this path. I turned around and went on a different trail, got out my topographical map and found a different way. And it was beautiful. but yeah, ideally tell people where you're going and how long you expect to be gone, and do all of those things, and use common sense and build up your skills. And
Yeah. I mean, that I think that, you know, the things that you are told to do when you even travel with other people, you know, to have a flight plan, as it were, and let people know, it applies doubly when you're. Here we have a question from Zoe, my former student who works for your publisher, saying, thank you both so much. I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to times when nature challenges us, whether it's freezing rain or allergies, and we feel out of sync, and being outside can seem to make things harder. Susan, I know you've spent some time in extreme climates, so maybe you have some thoughts on this as well. So that's a great question, I have to say. Lyanda, what is your sense of when we feel out of sync with the natural world? Which I mean, my hands are frozen most of the winter time. It doesn't make me not want to go out there.
You're more intrepid than me, Susan, too. I think, yeah, I would love to hear what you say. One thing that I would say is just that's okay. We're not in sync all the time, and yeah. We're just uncomfortable. We don't even have to do that. You know, in self-help, we hear all the time, you know, maybe you're not okay, and that's okay. And sometimes I want to just say, let's not rush and we don't need to put and that's okay. And sometimes we're just uncomfortable. Sometimes things are just happening. Sometimes we're not matching up. We're even really wise modern nature writers sometimes refer to the balance of nature, everything being in harmony and balance. That's just not true.
It's just not true.
If that were true, there would be no evolution, right? Because we're always trying to sort of, everything is just slightly off all the time. People, by people, I mean fungus, trees, raccoons,
those people,
beetles, all folk, earth folk, are hungry or hot or cold or over bounteous all the time. And so when we're uncomfortable, we're part of the whole. And that's just, so maybe just remember that.
Yeah.
And
I think that's great advice. I mean, and to think, you know, there's rarely, I love watching babies because, you know, 1 minute they're cheerful and 2 minutes later they're sobbing, and then they're hungry and then they want to sleep. And it's like, we're exactly like that. We just aren't allowed to, you know, emote so freely as that. I mean, if I broke down and cried every time I wanted to, people would think there was something wrong. So I think that, you know, that sort of feeling in sync with nature. I mean, the truth is, it doesn't happen for long sustained periods of time, right? It does happen in sort of, you know, you see the sunrise or the sunset and it's just this incredible thing. But before that, you're starving and you're thirsty and you're cold. So I think that it does come in pieces, you know, and it's not sustained, and to not expect that, right?
We've all had that going out on a trail, and we're all excited. We see we're looking at the birds, and we see we're identifying the wildflowers. And as soon as we get hungry, we're crabby.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
it's very crabby, right? Oh, somebody said that my toddler is having all of those feelings right at this moment.
Your image is coming and going. I'm sad to say I can't see it now. It's expansive.
Oh, is that right?
But,
okay.
I'm so, yeah, you usually come back just like the baby, the smiling baby.
Keep returning. Okay. As long as you can keep hearing me. So, here's a real question for us on the East Coast, which I think it's less of a problem out west, is ticks. So this is Jamie saying, I have a huge fear of deer ticks after being bitten twice, and going outside is very challenging for me. It unfortunately results in a great deal of anxiety. And I've been diagnosed with Lyme disease 12 times, so I completely sympathize with this. And, I think that maybe there's an equivalent in the Pacific Northwest, something that sort of feels dangerous and nearly microscopic. I don't know. What do you have?
Well, I'm going to go with cougars because they're so unseen. They're almost equally as unseen and unseeable.
Until they are seen.
You are seeing one. And, black bears are usually don't want anything to do with us unless they want our sandwiches now. To the point that we're not supposed to say the word sandwich in the woods. But no, in
Seriously?
In parks where there is a lot of camping and bears have learned the word sandwich. I know. So anyway, but not park deer ticks. So I know that I'm really privileged to live in a very non-noxious place, even in terms of with nettles. But we do have the equivalent would be, I hear people that are afraid to walk alone because there are cougars, and we have learned that it's better to be in a group. It's better to, call and make noise and have a cell phone and all this stuff. So, I mean, that would be my comparison. But as far as ticks directly, Susan, do you have a thought or advice for calming that?
I mean, what I appreciate about winter is that I can forget about the ticks for a while, and I roam freely through the woods, and but at this time of the year, I won't really go much off of a path, and I take the precautions that I need to take, and I just I feel lucky that I've had it so many times, and I'm still out doing these things. There's some people who've gotten sick and are not have not been as lucky, but. I have come back, and I take a shower every single night of the year, and I check every piece of my body for a tick. And that as a method has kept me tick free, I think, for 3 or 4 years now. So that actually has been pretty effective. I mean, it's strange things like take a shower before you go to bed, because you don't want to take them with you. And I think that. There's the one thing I want to say is that I don't want the ticks to keep me from doing what I love most.
To further comments coming up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you were bitten in the winter when there was snow on the ground. Yeah, that's the other thing. It's a challenge. It really is. I don't think I have an answer to that, but for people who are like, well, why do you keep going out into the woods? It's like, because I can't not, and I think that you have to make that own weighing for yourself as sort of, are you willing to take that risk? I think, but with many things that we do, it's like you get in your car, it's like, am I willing to take that risk, to decide and to be as careful as you possibly can each time, and
so Becky says something really important, I think, in responding to Jamie, that there's nothing creepier than, I've had ticks. I mean, I've traveled in the tropics and it's nothing creepier than having this hard, crunchy thing embedded in your skin. It is a uniquely terrifying way. But in those places, like Susan was saying, people have just said over and over, when I just said, I'm just going to look over myself, they're like, no, you have to take a shower. And if you're really, maybe being vigilant can help calm your anxiety, and just all the other creatures are walking amidst the ticks as well, without our resources to be as vigilant as we are. And just, deep breath and as careful as you can be, and then acknowledge that we all see that it is awful and creepy.
Yeah. So here, there's, I think I like this. I think the goal is to take a hiking trip where I have to worry less about it, and then go with a group and don't say sandwich. Good luck. And then, of course, you go to the desert Southwest, you got rattlesnakes. I mean, there's always something, right?
I guess this ferocious, I thought my room is locked off, but this ferocious predator just came in.
Oh, so I have one of those ferocious predators. Okay. So it seems like we've now hit our 8 o'clock time here. So Susanna's showing up just on time.
I'm back.
Magically.
Oh, that was absolutely wonderful. What a great discussion. I think we've all changed our relationship a little bit with nature this last year. And so many of us have had a little bit more time to spend outdoors, and have come to discover a little bit more about the magic you can experience when you step outside your house. It's fantastic. And I just want to thank Lyanda and Susan, both of you, so much for this excellent discussion. Thank you to everyone who watched live with us tonight. Thanks to everyone who's going to be watching this on YouTube in perpetuity. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of Lyanda's book, Rooted,
Buy a
either
copy.
from Oblong or your local independent bookstore, wherever you live. And
No,
definitely
just buy it
check out.
from Oblong. Stop.
Okay, that's good too. That's good.
Books.
Check out Susan's books too. She's
I
got an incredible
want
body
my
of work.
local
So
bookstore to be here forever.
you're the best. Thank you all so much, and have a beautiful rest of your week.
You too. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Good night, everybody.
I hope I meet you in person sometime.
Like,
Bye.
good night.
Bye.
Have a lovely evening.
So nice. Thank
How
you.
do I?